This bulletin proudly brought to you in association with Alex Campbell's Menswear.
Kia ora, good evening. Welcome to the South Today. I'm Daryl Baser. New Zealand is more than halfway through the COVID-19 lockdown. The Ministry of Health says the number of COVID-19 cases in the Southern District Area Health Board has climbed to 200, but the rate of new cases continues to drop. With only 29 new COVID-19 cases announced in New Zealand today, the lowest number of cases since March 23rd, before the lockdown began. Things are changing for New Zealand as this global pandemic continues to spread, and the South Today isn't immune to the issues facing the nation, as we all band together to stop the spread of COVID-19. We at Allied Press thank you for your viewership and understanding at this time, as New Zealand joins the rest of the world in doing everything possible to reduce the impacts of the virus. In today's edition of Global Insight, international relations expert Robert Patman tells ODT features writer Bruce Munro governments across the world are dealing with COVID-19 differently as the world grapples with the virus and the lasting effects it'll have on the globe.
Welcome, I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is international relations specialist via video link Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. COVID-19 is disrupting life at many levels, including in the political sphere, where the rise of populism has been a noticeable global trend in recent years. Welcome, Robert.
Good morning, Bruce.
Could COVID-19 reverse the populist upsurge?
Well, first of all, I think we should be very clear in what we mean by the populist upsurge. A number of politicians have made it into power in countries like the United Kingdom, the United States and Brazil, and presenting themselves as populists. What is a populist? They present themselves as authentic voices of the nation. They also present the troubles of the nation as being the result of foreigners or immigrants. They also believe that nation states run the world and that many of the problems of states can be attributed to, if you like, global elites. And so this is their prescription. They're pretty strong on promises, and many of people like Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil have got to power essentially on a mixture of exploiting a mixture of grievances, hate, resentment, and making quite outlandish promises. So that's the upsurge of populism that we've seen. What's been revealing about the COVID-19 crisis since it developed, it should be recalled that it was in the Wuhan in China when the first cases were detected, and they were confirmed by the Chinese government about a month later in December. So since early January, I think the world's been on alert that we're facing a very serious health problem. And if you look at the three cases in question, the United Kingdom, where there's a populist government, the United States and Brazil, they have struggled to come to terms with this problem. It's quite, at first they downplayed the problem. The WHO was warning by the end of January that there was an international global health emergency. And by 11th of March, they said it was a global pandemic. But there was plenty of warning. From January onwards, the World Health Organization in mid-January was suggesting this was a really serious problem and was advising it was advising people to take basic health procedures, and it was urging governments to put an emphasis on testing, isolation and quarantine. But in Britain and the United States, they were very slow to respond. Britain initially responded in February with what some people have called the herd immunity approach, was an attempt not to suppress it, but to contain it. Now, the government in the UK has subsequently abandoned that problem. Meanwhile, in the United States, Mr. Trump spent much of February downplaying the issue. He even predicted it would be gone by April, and he's urged Americans to face the prospect of getting back to work as soon as possible, probably by the end of Easter. So there has been, if you like, a lot of denial going on in both the UK and the United States. And Brazil, it's a similar picture. Bolsonaro, even 2 days ago, was suggesting that it was a Chinese conspiracy that was leading to COVID-19. So it seems to be a bit of a pattern here. We've got, unfortunately, and no one should derive pleasure from that, all three countries have been severely hit by COVID-19. If you look at the United Kingdom, the death toll is now more than 7,000 in the United States and rising steeply. It's more than 14,000 and rising steeply. In Brazil, which was affected by COVID-19 a little bit later in the picture, the death toll is currently just over 600 and rising. Was this inevitable? No, it wasn't. It was because these populist governments were very reluctant to listen to science and public health professionals. And as a result, they've had to react somewhat late, somewhat belatedly to a global pandemic. And unfortunately, they are now scrambling. At one point, to give you an idea about the scale of this, Bruce, at one point, Mr. Trump turned down the offer of ventilators from the WTO because essentially they weren't American-made. And Mr. Johnson turned down the prospect of a European-wide effort to distribute ventilators. So on the grounds that Britain was now an independent country. But both countries are facing very serious problems. This could mean, I think, as public reflects how these governments perform when dealing with an actual crisis. You see, most of these politicians seem to be very capable at dealing with crises that they create or believe they've been created in the past and diagnosing them. But the first big test, a problem like COVID-19, really seems to have found them wanting. Why is that? It may be because COVID-19 knows no borders. It does not, it's indifferent to what populists call it. And also the most reliable way to deal with the problem involves scientific expertise and health professionals. And I think what we've seen in the last 3 months through COVID-19 is that the world will increasingly have to cooperate. And this, of course, cuts right across the populist message that states can go it alone to solve their problems. COVID-19 seems to suggest the opposite. And it's no coincidence that Gordon Brown, a former UK Prime Minister, is now recommending a temporary form of world government to tackle the twin crises, the economic crisis and the medical crisis caused by COVID-19.
Thank you, Robert. Can you just quickly tell us a little bit more about what Gordon Brown is suggesting and how seriously that's being taken?
Gordon Brown, who actually played a role in trying to deal with the consequences of the financial crisis, the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, has argued that basically representatives of most countries in the world, including developing countries, should form a temporary executive to try to come up with a coordinated response to COVID-19. You may recall that we discussed New Zealand's response in the past, and New Zealand has done really well, not least because it has taken science seriously and the advice of public health professionals in this country, and it's also been very willing to learn from the experience of other countries like South Korea, Singapore. But however well New Zealand does, if we eradicate the problem here or suppress it dramatically, we still face the problem that there is not a coordinated response outside New Zealand to deal with it. Every state at the moment is competing for ventilators, they're competing for masks, they're competing, it's almost a race to the bottom, they're competing for things and they're trying to solve a global problem with a national interest approach. And I think what Brown is saying is that governments have to accept this as a global emergency, and that a global challenge like COVID-19 requires, by definition, a global response.
So how seriously is that call being taken by Gordon Brown, by the world leaders?
Well, it's only just come in the last few days. I think given the difficulties which many governments are now experiencing, when I say many, it's a wide variety of performance in relation to this problem. But countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, there's a lot of anger and frustration in both countries. And I think against that backdrop, I think his ideas might get more traction than they otherwise would. What is clear, as this problem escalates, and according to some health professionals, we're probably in global terms at the beginning of it rather than the end of it. Unless a vaccine is developed quickly, I think while there may not be an immediate uptake of Gordon Brown's ideas, we cannot rule out some sort of approach like this as the crisis deepens. And people, and we've already seen large numbers of people die. Almost unspeakable numbers of deaths are predicted. This is an extremely infectious disease, and we do actually need, there is a mismatch at the moment in the way that countries are being left to their own devices to deal with a problem that doesn't recognise borders. And I think what Brown is suggesting is that we need to be smart in the way we approach this problem if we're going to minimise its impact. And being smart involves coming up with much greater international coordination than we've seen hitherto to this problem. As it is now hitting the developing world, where there's a very poor health infrastructure. Unless there's some coordinated international response, the impact of COVID-19 in those countries could be absolutely devastating beyond our worst nightmares. And then there is the danger that the longer this COVID-19 continues to spread, that it might mutate, which would again would severely complicate the prospect of getting a vaccine.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure Brown's idea, how far it will go, but it's certainly, in the past, countries have, shown a willingness after a disaster like the Second World War to internationally coordinate. They set up the United Nations, and the same after the First World War. In a sense, this, many people have described the battle against COVID-19 as a war. It's certainly a very formidable foe.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Ka kite anō.
Dunedin is once again a world record holder. Guinness World Records last night reversed its controversial decision to strip Baldwin Street of its claim to fame, admitting its measuring method had been wrong. The Otago Daily Times spoke to surveyor Toby Stoff, who was behind the campaign to take the title after an almost equally steep street in Wales was awarded it in the middle of last year.
Well, we got a very promising email last night at about 9 o'clock saying that, thanks for the report, thanks for the info. Guinness has gone and got a bit of independent advice, and they said, if you measure a road on the inside of a curve, it'll be steeper than if you measure it on the centre line, and centre line gives you a pretty good approximation of overall gradient. So it's pretty promising. But until you actually get the money in the bank, there's we won't count our chickens. And it started off as a bit of a, don't know how you describe it really. It's like outraged of Dunedin, blah blah blah, a bit of venting, and then we did a bit of investigation, and then we thought, hang on a sec, I think they might have made a bit of a boo-boo here. And then obviously the media thought that sounds like a bit of a laugh, so they got behind it, and then some mates got involved, and then some mates started crowdfunding it, and sort of snowballed. So I had no intention of taking it this far, but labour of love. The whole process though, like just getting the media, getting the community involved, everyone, it made it really special and actually really enjoyable. So yeah, there's more issues than just measuring the gradient of a road. There's like all the wider things as well, like civic pride and all these sorts of things. Yeah, I mean, the timing's not great. I mean, being in the middle of a global pandemic, there's some really serious stuff going on at the moment. People are losing their lives, people are stressed, losing businesses and jobs. It's horrible, so the timing is pretty, I don't know, not ideal. There's a lot of bad things going on, but, to my way of thinking, look, any wee glimmer of sunshine, you know what I mean? If it brightens someone's day a wee bit, we got a world record back, then that's great, but let's not lose sight of some of the bigger global issues here. We've got a lot of work to do now. If someone rocks up with a street that's steeper over 10 metres on the centre line, well, there you go, they've got the world record, but we'll look after the world record for now.
Checking smoke alarms and keeping matches away from children are just two recommendations for people to follow during the COVID-19 lockdown. That's from Fire and Emergency New Zealand, who are encouraging people to be vigilant about fire safety in the home.
No one wants to see their house burning down. And with everybody currently indoors in their self-isolating bubble, Fire and Emergency New Zealand says it's more important than ever to be fire safe at home. Dunedin's Fire Risk Management Principal Advisor Isaiah Piho says the clocks going back at the end of daylight saving last weekend is a good reminder to give smoke alarms their 6-monthly check.
With daylight savings, Fire and Emergency ask people to check their smoke alarms, and by checking the smoke alarms, it just involves having to push the button or making sure that your smoke alarm works. We recommend long life photoelectric smoke alarms. The best that you can get are interconnected smoke alarms, and it's just a good activity with the kids actually to go around, push the button and make sure your smoke alarms work.
Piho says with children potentially getting bored at home, adults need to be mindful of how they store their matches and lighters.
We've got kids cooped up at home. In fact, I've got 2 kids upstairs, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And what we just want people to do is be absolutely mindful of how they have their matches and lighters stored. Now is a good time to educate your kids that matches and lighters are tools, not toys. And the best thing to do is keep them out of reach of children, so out of sight and out of mind.
Piho also points out that in New Zealand, a third of house fires happen in the kitchen, and FENZ recommends for everyone to keep looking while you're cooking. In Dunedin, the South Today.
In this edition of Rugby Chat, Paul Dwyer talks to Highlanders CEO Roger Clark about the devastating effects coronavirus has had on the game of rugby from the grassroots to the professional level.
So look, I was watching some nefarious news channel the other day and I felt they did a bit of a hatchet job on the Highlanders. And I was a bit concerned that they were sort of picking out the Highlanders from other franchises, and all the franchises, mate, are in the same boat. So how are you guys travelling?
Yeah, look, I was pretty disappointed in that article too, Paul. I thought it was pretty unbalanced considering the guy he'd spoken to, Mark Hinton as well, who I thought did a pretty good job in a balanced interview. And the guy did that interview, spoken to all the CEOs, and really what everybody was saying was that we're all in the same position, really. It's just like every business when you close down now 3 forms of revenue, which is sponsorship, membership and ticket sales, and then also broadcasting, then business becomes pretty tough. So then all of a sudden it becomes for a battle of survival, and like the other 5 clubs, we're doing our best to make sure that we do survive and that we come through the other end in a really strong position to be able to take advantage of any opportunities that come out the other side. But I will say, Paul, that in the last 25 years, mate, we're in the best position we've ever been to be able to take advantage of that on the basis that we have got some reserves. We've acted pretty prudently. We've got low cost structures compared to the other clubs, and all of us, pretty well straight away, the 100% of the staff took a 30% cut to make sure that we could get ourselves through. And obviously, like everyone, we're going to review that every month. But at this stage, we'll keep everybody on board.
So, but you would have, talking about those cost structures, I mean, your cost structures would be less than most of the other franchises anyway. You'd, in terms of actual staff, you'd be well down on staff numbers compared with the other franchises, wouldn't you?
Yeah, look, we're probably anywhere between 10 and 20 people down on most of the other Super Rugby clubs, but those clubs are having to make some even tougher decisions earlier than maybe we've had to on the basis of that. But as most people know, our structure's been pretty lean. From when I started back with Jamie back in 2010, we didn't have a lot anyway, so we had to make sure we did a lot more with less, and that's the sort of philosophy we run our business for the last 10 years.
So, so in terms of I think you might have said in the paper the other day that to run a franchise like you guys are running, it costs you what, roughly about $500,000 a month?
Yeah, look, it's there's two tranches of revenue. The first one is from broadcasting, which pays our players, and that comes through broadcast to New Zealand Rugby and then straight to the players, and we just manage that budget. And then, it's the actual fixed costs and the staff to run a Super Rugby club. That's just under $500,000 a month, and as you can imagine, just like other businesses, if you don't cut your costs pretty quickly when the revenue dries up, you're burning cash pretty quickly.
Right, mate. Look, let's talk about. Let's go back and talk about this year so far. I think you played 5 games. You had 4 losses, but you had massive squad changes from last year. So how did you and the board think you were travelling before this all shut down?
Not great. Yeah. No, look, it hadn't been one of our better seasons. There are a number of challenges that we've had, obviously with a lot of our key players leaving. But at the end of the day, our expectations were definitely higher than the results that we've had so far. So, yeah, look, we're pretty harsh on ourselves, as you know, Paul, and working pretty hard even while we're in shutdown to make sure that when we come out of the other side of this, whatever that looks like, we're in a better position.
At the same time, though, mate, I've talked to a lot of rugby coaches. It's a lot harder now. Is it a lot, from your point of view, is it a lot harder to find good quality players?
Yeah, look, I think the depth, the middle tier of depth has left New Zealand Rugby. So once you've picked your 38 players in a Super Rugby team, anybody that's injured is a frontline player, and it's pretty hard to get. You're basically picking players out of club footy, and that's a tough gig because those guys aren't fully professional players in most cases, and it takes them a while to get up to speed. And then on our case, because we lost so many players, it was about a turnover of 14 last year. There are a lot of those young fellas that it's their first time in Super Rugby, and maybe we could have done things better last year to make sure some of them were exposed to a little bit more Super Rugby in hindsight than we did. But, it's pretty hard to leave your Elliot Dixons and your Ben Smiths and all those guys on the sideline when you're trying to win games, because it's a pretty tough competition. And obviously you're trying to win a competition. And then you get to a situation like we have now where we've had to flood a lot of new players at this level. And to be fair, I think what they're all finding out and what the public is seeing is that there's a massive void between Mitre 10 Cup and Super Rugby. And these guys take at least one season, a minimum of one season, to actually get to a stage where they can add some real value at that level, even though there's some good young players.
Yeah. Okay. So Aaron and Brownie, they're the guys with the pressure on their shoulders. How were they coping with that? And in this little lockdown period, what can they work on to come out with hopefully with a better team at the end of it?
Yeah, look, we're as you know from the group we're pretty lucky. We've got a pretty experienced coaching group, both from a playing perspective, as in understanding what the players need, and also from a rugby background perspective. So they worked really hard to get the players to a level of awareness that they can get them to. The bottom line is when you get into the heat of the battle, you then got to allow, the players have got to be able to pull that out for themselves. And not only have we lost a lot of good players, we've lost a lot of leadership and experience. And so that's been a bit of a challenge for us. In the lockdown, obviously we can work on all the things that, things like leadership we talked about. We've got a routine running. So basically the guys are clocking in between 8:30 and 3 o'clock every day, where they've got to be involved in either professional development sessions, nutrition sessions, S&C and all that sort of thing. And then also trying to grow our leaders as well, which is something that it's not something we used to do 20 years ago, but these days, these young men, have been, in my view, mollycoddled a lot, and you don't have a lot of natural leaders. And so it's something that, the people like the Jamies and the Aarons and the Brownies and the Mark Hammets of this world, Clark Dermodys of this world, spend a lot of their time trying to grow that leadership in those young men.
And for the full interview, head online to odt.co.nz. And on a lighter note, reporters in Oamaru stumbled across a musical scene where people were sharing the gift of music from their respective bubbles. On one side of a suburban street in Oamaru, a drummer keeps a beat, while on the other side, a guitarist shreds at full noise. Both musicians in their own bubbles on opposite sides of a typically quiet residential street. While some young fans look on, observing the 2-metre social distancing rules. In Oamaru, the South Today. Time now for a look at the weather.
Tonight's weather proudly brought to you by Mole Map.
Beginning with the situation, a westerly airflow brings mostly fine weather tomorrow and Saturday, but a trough of lower pressure deepens, bringing wind, rain and possibly alpine snow on Sunday. In the southern towns, the Catlins and Gore can both expect moderate westerlies, moderate mostly fine conditions and 15 degrees. Balclutha and Lumsden are due to be similar and slightly warmer on 16 degrees. Heading westwards to the Central Lakes, Wanaka and Alexandra are both heading for mostly clear skies and 18 degrees. Queenstown is similar but cooler with 17, while Te Anau can expect fresh westerlies, cloud and 14 degrees. Heading north and along the coast, Timaru and Oamaru are due for light easterlies, clear skies and 15 degrees. While heading inland, Twizel and Omarama are in for light winds, mostly fine skies and 18 degrees. In Dunedin, cloudy tonight with moderate southwesterlies and an overnight low of 7 degrees. It should be mostly fine and sunny tomorrow with cool southwest winds dying out, a high of 15 and a low of 8. It'll be similar on Saturday with mostly fine and sunny with light northeasterlies, a high of 15 and a low of 11. Expect showers tonight in Invercargill with a chilly low of 8 degrees. Those showers clear for sunny periods increasing tomorrow morning with a high of 14 and a low of 8 degrees. It'll be fine on Saturday with sunny periods and some cloud, gusty westerly winds and a high of 15 and a low of 8. And that's all from the South Today team for this Thursday, and indeed for the week as we're taking a break for Easter, returning to air on Tuesday the 14th of April. For the latest news from the southern region, head online to odt.co.nz and follow Channel 39 on Facebook. Stay tuned to Channel 39 for the latest COVID-19 updates from the government. Have a great Easter break, stay calm during the pandemic, and as the Prime Minister says, be kind. Ta kite anō, see you after Easter.
This bulletin proudly brought to you in association with Alex Campbell's Menswear.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.